When working with the gateway to manipulate things like interface IP addresses and routing or routing protocols, we're going to be interoperating directly with the gateway itself. And that can be done with the web user interface. It can also be done with the command line interface. And in an environment where I have multiple administrators, that can cause a problem. Now, you can have lots of people logged in as far as viewing information, but as far as read-write access, it's one at a time. So if the admin currently has the web user interface open over to the gateway, and then another administrator, let's imagine we have Bob, and Bob is connected to the console and logging in directly there, even if both users are associated with roles that give them full privileges, only one of those users is going to have a lock on Gaia at any given time. So in this hands-on lab and demonstration, let's do this. Let's go ahead and from a PC, we'll start with DCNUG. And from DCNUG, let's open up a web user interface over to the gateway. And there's a couple of ways of doing it from here. We could either open a browser directly to https:// and the IP address of the gateway, or we could use Smart Console and then use a shortcut from Smart Console to open up a web user interface over to the gateway. In either case, it would be the administrator with a web user interface going to this gateway. So for the demonstration, we'll go ahead and connect via admin that way, and then we'll connect via Bob. And we'll take a look at the locks that are in place and also how to override those locks in the event that Bob needs to remove the lock that admin currently has on the system so Bob can do more work right there at the CLI. So here on DCNUG, let's go ahead and launch Smart Console by clicking Login. And here in Smart Console, if we click on Gateways and Servers in the upper left over here, and then we right-click on Firewall 1, and then from the drop-down, hover over Actions, and from here we can select Open Web UI for the web user interface to manage and work with Gaia on Gateway 1. So we'll click on Open Web UI, and we could have got the same results just by opening up a browser to https:// and the IP address of that gateway. That would do it as well. Now, the gateway is using a self-signed certificate, so to get past that, we're going to click on Advanced, and then scroll down and click on Proceed Anyway, and then we'll log in as admin to Gaia. So we'll supply the password and click Login. Now, regarding a lock on Gaia, there can only be one person with full read-write access at a time, and that individual will have the lock. And anybody else is going to be read-only. And because we're the only administrator currently logged in, either at the command line or with the web graphical user interface, there's no problem yet. But let's introduce a problem. Let's go ahead over here on the left, and let's collapse a few layers, and let's create a new user account, and we'll create Bob. So here under User Management on the left, let's click on Users, and then from the middle pane here, we'll click on Add, and let's create a user called Bob. We'll supply the lab password. We'll confirm the lab password, and we'll give him a user ID of, let's say, 200. And then as far as roles, let's give him the role of admin role and click on Add. So Bob will have a whole bunch of privileges based on the role. He'll also have the ability to access this gateway via the web user interface or from the CLI. And that could be either at the console or with an SSH client. Either way would work. So we'll go ahead and click on OK. And now that that's done, let's go ahead and minimize the web user interface for a moment right here. And let's also minimize Smart Console. And on the taskbar here on DCNUG, there's this icon right here for multi-tabbed PuTTY. And let's go ahead and use this to open up an SSH shell for a command line access over to Firewall 1. So we'll go ahead and click on this icon down here for a multi-tab PuTTY. Then we're going to use this icon up here on the far left to add a new server. We're basically going to point to the gateway. So we'll click on this icon right there. The IP address is 192.168.1.111 for Gateway 1. We're going to use SSH. We'll click that radio button, and we're going to use the default port, but it's going to be 22 either way. And then we'll go ahead and click on OK. And here with this little satellite dish icon, we'll go ahead and use the drop down, and we'll simply click on the 192.168.1.111, and that'll open up an SSH session over to Gateway 1. And because this is our initial connection, it wants us to verify the fingerprint, just to verify we're talking to the correct device. And if it is, we'll click on yes, which we'll do. And then we'll log on as Bob. So we'll type in Bob's username, and we'll put in Bob's password, and then press enter. And now we have good news and bad news. The good news is that we are successfully logged on as Bob. And the bad news is that the lock on the configuration is currently not us. It's owned by admin. And if we weren't sure, we could issue this command, show space config-lock, and press enter. And that would confirm for us who has the lock. It's admin. where he's coming from. That's his source IP address. And he's also using the web user interface. And that's the mechanism he's used to access Gaia. And that's why he has the lock. So if we wanted to override the lock, we can simply use this option right here. Lock database override. And that would take away the lock from admin, and it would give it to us right here at this command line. So let's do that. I'm going to go ahead and just click and drag over lock database override, and then right click, and that will paste it in, and I'll press enter. So now, if we do the up arrow key a couple times to do a show config-lock, it now shows that it's us, Bob, that has the lock. And if we minimize this SSH shell, and let's do that real quick. We'll just minimize this window. And let's bring back our Chrome window by going down to the taskbar and clicking on the Chrome icon. If we click on anything to refresh the screen, it indicates that the configuration is locked. And that's because we're logged on as admin and Bob has the lock over at the CLI. So what we can do, if we want to take the lock back, we can go ahead and click on this icon right there, which we'll do, the little icon that looks like the lock. It asks us if we're sure we want to override the lock. We'll say yes. And now we once again have the lock. And if we go back to our SSH session, we can hover near the bottom and go back to that and hit the up arrow key again to show config lock. Once again, it confirms for us that admin has the lock coming from that IP address and that admin obtained that lock via the web user interface. In this nugget, we've confirmed that Gaia will allow only one individual with full read-write access to have a lock on the system at any given time. We also identified on how we can verify the lock and also override that lock from both the web user interface and the command line interface. I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.